Hey, so, Path of Exile. That's a game, right? And I've pumped a ton of hours into it, but I'm also not a masochist. I've never tried the end game, never wanted to. You know, the prospect of running maps for an eternity just never appealed to me, you know? So I recently decided to try it after having bounced off of PoE 2's endgame, because I decided to not only master the art of building a good character from scratch and theory crafting, but I also decided that I was going to give that PoE 1 endgame a try, like a fair shake, you know, and try to beat that endgame content. And I gotta say, it is a lot harder than I ever imagined. I mean, I got nothing but respect for these guys and gals that give this a try and decide that they're going to do this with their lives. I say with their lives because, I mean, this is a grind that is akin to a full-time job. And if we want to stay competitive in the Asian market, then we need some government subsidies for these guys and gals, man, because we need them to be sitting in that computer chair until their asses fuse to the fake leather and have to be removed surgically by a professional. I'm not saying that I'm good at the game. Please don't get me wrong. Oh, no. Farthest thing from it, man. If I excel at anything, it's character builds. I think you all know that. But aside from that, I am shit at it, as I imagine the vast majority of the audience is. At least that's what I tell myself. If I could go down a list of my grievances with PoE 1, it would be a pretty long list, and we would be here for a while. Chiefly among those concerns would be the way that trading in the game works, or as is the case with most people, does not work. The emphasis on friction, as the devs put it, making it artificially hard to do simple things like buy an item from another guy, is in an effort to keep people from being able to circumvent the difficulty of the end game. And I would say that it's not as difficult as it is time consuming. And that's really what their goal is to make it a lot more time consuming for you to get to the end goal. Now, who am I to say that they're right or wrong? It's their game, you know, but they're wrong. This isn't a video about that. You know, I want to talk about Path of Exile 2. Now, first off, let's get this out of the way. Did I have any expectations for this game because it's a sequel? No. I mean, it was obvious from the reveal trailer that this was going to be something completely different, right? I expected that we were going to get a Souls-like ARPG with an emphasis on fast combat with hordes of enemies, right? That was my only expectation. And what we got was a Souls-like ARPG with an emphasis on slow combat, slow walking, slow gear progression, slow gem progression, slow everything with hordes of enemies. But there are hordes of YouTubers too, and they've already covered this subject to death. This is my video, and my videos are all about me. So let's talk about my reasons for wanting to punch Path of Exile 2 in its face. Reason number one, that's the emphasis on combos. I know that this has been covered, but people never talk about it in depth. You know, there are reasons why this emphasis on combo systems frustrates them. The reason to me is quite simple, but I have to use Path of Exile 1 as an exhaustive example. In ARPGs, there is a tendency for players to play in one way, even if the game has an excellent character build system. Players are always streamlining their characters and therefore their playstyle. Let me explain. In Path of Exile 1, I was always trying to get my character to the point where I no longer needed to rely on pressing multiple buttons every time I needed to kill something. Mainly because I'm lazy, but partly because of efficiency and survivability. This tendency is reinforced by the game because it puts so many monsters on the screen at the same time, and does so often that if you have to press a multi-button combo every time you want to kill a white monster, you're gonna burn out. But more importantly, the longer you're standing in one place, casting spells or doing attacks, the more likely you are to get killed. Because 2000 HP can disappear like that. When the player starts to streamline their character, they're not only mitigating mechanical burnout, but they're also mitigating the death of their character. The faster you can kill, the less you physically have to do in order to kill, and the better your chances for survival. Everyone gravitates to that playstyle because it's the only viable strategy, or at least provides you with the best chances to survive if you, say, lack the pure skill required to play at a high level. This is reinforced once again by the fact that the game has a specific feedback loop. You can die quickly, so quickly that you don't even know what killed you sometimes. So you have to kill faster than the enemy can hit you, because if the enemy can hit you, they can kill you. If you do die, you lose EXP as a penalty. And in the end game, that penalty can sometimes be all of the EXP that you gained in that map. You, as the player, want to avoid that at all costs. So most players tend towards movement speed, attack or spell speed, and faster clears, especially since the grind is so intense that you naturally tend towards faster kills, because the faster you kill something, the faster their loot drops. Plus, it's visually fun to watch an entire screen explode. A lot of this is about dopamine, but just as much of it is physical. Now think about it like this. If there are nearly 30,000 enemies in a game, and that's really a conservative number for PoE, if there are 30,000 enemies in the game and you gotta kill all of them, hitting one button to kill them is nearly 30,000 button presses. Even less if you're killing them in groups of, say, 10 or more. That brings the total down to like 3,000 individual button presses. But if you're forced to do this long, drawn-out combo every time you want to kill an enemy, say 3-button combos, right? You have to press that button 90,000 times. But Path of Exile 2 goes a step further. You need to do sometimes multiple combos to kill enemies, because even white enemies don't go down to the first combo. They do sometimes later on, but in the early game, woo, it's a slog. So in reality, it's about 180,000 button presses, okay? Even divided by groups of 10, it's still 18,000 button presses, which is 6 times more than the amount you would have to do in Path of Exile 1. As an older gamer, I can tell you that games like PoE are the reason that I have bad shoulders and a bad back. I can only sit in a chair for so long pressing keys or hitting buttons on a controller before the pain starts to set in. Just remember that I'm one of the first generation of kids that actually grew up with games as kind of like a staple of life. So that population, my population, is getting older, having back pain, complaining about the previous generations and their taste in music, you know, old people shit. To me, that means that people are always going to try and streamline your game, and if that means using one of 3 different meta builds that crush the game, that's what people are going to do to save themselves valuable time, because people's time is also limited, you know, especially the older population, and to save themselves pain in repetitive movements. And again, it's the best way to survive when you clear a room so fast that you don't even have to think. If you don't have to think, then you don't have to worry about dying. The thing is, this is where I think you start to run into problems. The player is now used to not having to think, so they become complacent, and the moment they get one shot and hit a wall, instead of trying to play better, they try to exploit the systems in their favor, because change is hard. Like if you played a game and half of it was a platformer and the last half was an FPS with completely different controls, that would be pretty jarring. So when a player cruises through the first half of PoE 1 and they hit a wall and suddenly the game wants them to completely change their way of playing, the path of least resistance is to actually swap some equipment around and respec some passive points. The game being too easy too early is part of the reason why PoE 1 has trouble keeping new players. curves after a certain point in the campaign, because you're meant to sit down and reconfigure your build every couple of acts or so. When the player hits a wall, it's not the easiest to climb over, and most people are not used to that. Not to mention that the wall in the end game can be so tall that I think most players are going to give up at that point, because the one thing they really liked, the progression, is lost. You feel like you're standing still as EXP starts dribbling in and drips and drabs, and the loot only gets incrementally better, but the challenge keeps doubling in response. It can be very daunting. In this way, Path of Exile 2 has the upper hand, right? It is better at teaching the player because it gives the player a lot more time to learn their combos, but it requires that style of play early on, and this is where it starts to stumble. You have a game that is known for having huge groups of monsters explode into ice cube confetti, and Path of Exile 2 is known for having less of nearly everything. Less mobs, smaller groups, longer fights. So while they did manage to reduce the amount of monsters, they also reduced one of the best things about PoE, exploding groups of squishy monsters. If there's less monsters to kill, less monsters explode, and the less dopamine floods my brain. I want to hear that satisfying crack of enemies getting ass blasted in unison. But it's also not as satisfying to kill groups of enemies in PoE 2 because of the association that we have with the white, blue, and yellow power scheme. White monsters are like furniture in an ARPG, you know? We don't care about them. We just like the pretty lights they emit when they die. Blues are a threat, but they're only a threat if they survive long enough to hit you, which they most likely won't. And yellows are usually the real challenge, the big fight that you have in the level. So you save up all your tactical resources for those big fights, like special flasks, Val skills, but also your mental resources, you know, like concentration and willpower. As a player, you only have so much of this, so it's best to conserve its use, and decision fatigue is a real thing. You can exhaust the player by asking them to make too many decisions. That is why PoE 1 works so great. Long periods of stuff exploding, punctuated by the occasional tough fight. So the yellows get all of your attention, as do the unique monsters and boss monsters. But in Path of Exile 2, you've kind of created a completely different situation. White monsters have become blue monsters, blues have become moderately weaker yellows, and yellows have stayed the same. So everything just takes way longer to kill, and when you're repeating the same 3-hit combo well into 3 to 4 hours of gameplay, it gets really tedious really fast. That in essence is what's wrong with the Huntress, because it takes 3 times longer to kill just about everything in this game, and to top it all off, you're not even rewarded for that effort. And that brings me to my second reason. Where the hell is all my loot? So you spend 10 minutes trying to kill that yellow. What did you get in return? Nothing, you say? A scroll of wisdom, you say? I'd say that doesn't sound worth playing. You have a game that has a constantly ramping level of difficulty that expects you to be constantly upgrading your gear, but the quantities of gear you're getting isn't enough to fill that need. This means that you'll have to grind at various stages and change your build drastically at times to make progress without dying constantly. And each time you die, for most people, that's a sort of bruise to your ego, you know? If the challenge is mechanical, you can build up your skills over time to overcome that challenge if your build lacked the power to get you through, and therefore patch up your ego. That's how Dark Souls games work. And I think that it's a really appropriate example to give because they obviously were inspired by Dark Souls. I mean, just look at the design of the game, right? You've got limited flasks. You only got 2 types of flask this time. You've got a red flask and a blue flask. That sounds familiar. Yeah, they were totally inspired by Dark Souls, right? You can only refill them by going into the well that was at the beginning when the game first released. You know, those kinds of things, like having checkpoints and having those checkpoints refill your resources and all those kind of things, all that stuff is ripped directly from Dark Souls. And that's not even getting to the dodge roll mechanics, the parry mechanics that they just added, all that kind of thing. Yeah, it's not even getting to that stuff. So this game was obviously inspired by Dark Souls. It feels good in Dark Souls games because we don't need dopamine from loot showers in that game, because we get it from how satisfying it is to overcome each challenge. It also doesn't put giant groups of enemies on screen clustered together, all of which want a piece of your ass. If it did, the combat would become exhausting, not to mention way too hard to feel fun. It's more like popping a boil in your ass, right? You would have rather not had one at all, but it feels good now that it's gone. Now, this is the same principle as Borderlands, but kind of in the opposite way. The combat is dog-ass easy, but the satisfaction comes in the shower of loot that you get and how pretty the lights are. The loot and power curve becomes an emphasis because the enemies end up having so many damn hit points that they become dangerous just by virtue that they're around longer to hit you. So you really need that loot shower, and you need it often so that you can progress, but also to reward you for your hard work. But the loot in Path of Exile 2 sucks, and it's not just because you don't get a lot of it, but that is a major reason, but because what you get also sucks, and it's for multiple reasons. I have been through the campaign, I would say at this point, 3 or 4 times, right? And each playthrough I would get uniques, but I usually didn't get any unique items until very late in the game. I'm talking about when I'm like level 40, level 60, and so on, right? Even at level 40 and level 60, I was having uniques drop for me almost without exception. Maybe there were 2 items that were the exception. Out of like 10 unique items, 8 to 9 of them were level 1 items. Level 1s, okay? Do you understand where I'm going with this? The unique item drops suck, okay? And this is exasperated by the fact that there's not a lot of loot that already drops. So that means that you have even less of a chance of getting a good item. And then there's the fact that when you actually do get a unique item that might be good, you find out that all of the benefits are outweighed by the negatives of it. There were a few items in PoE that had some negative downsides, right? But they were usually minor and easy to get over. In Path of Exile 2, they took it the other way, man. Almost every unique item that I've gotten that was worth even the smallest shit had a negative on it that completely nullified its use to me. It's just an example of how whenever they give you some sort of advantage, it always comes with a disadvantage that nullifies the advantage. You can't take stuff away and then not put anything in its place. It feels bad. Not to mention that the loot is sort of restricted by the leveling system. Loot is very restrictive. Early on, you'll pick a class of weapon. For example, let's say you pick the hammer, right? Now, the way the skill gems work, you get uncut skill gems that drop after the latest patch often enough, right? You create the gem based on woefully small lists of available skills for that weapon type. And you wait until the next level of gem drops to upgrade the level of those gems. Eventually, you'll unlock the second tier of skills, and that tier will have another 4, maybe 5 skills to pick from. These are strictly level gated. No way to circumvent it as of the publishing of this video, as far as I know. So you find yourself with an extremely small list of possibilities early on, and not much more later on either. Because the longer you play, the more you'll lean into a damage type, which can restrict you down to 1, maybe 2 choices at every skill gem tier. So if you get tired of how a mechanic works and want to try something else, you're gonna have to wait for a really long time to change it. Whereas PoE 1, you could change your skills on the fly, and there was enough skills for each damage type that you now have plenty of options. So you're asking people not only to hit an enemy more to kill it, but also telling them that they have to do it with a skill they probably don't like for a much longer amount of time before they get any other options. It's stunning and brave. Not to mention the fact that you're stuck with these skills for so long that you really don't have any choice but to get used to using them, right? So you get used to using them, you find a combo that works, you get into the late game and you find out that you really need something else and new skills open up, and now you're like hesitant to get rid of the old skills because you're used to that combo now and it feels really satisfying to pull off. So you're less likely to try new things because you've gotten used to all these old things, because the game doesn't let you try new things at a fast enough pace. The other thing that's always kind of like, I don't know, puzzled me about this whole system is the fact that like in PoE 1, it was actually a really nice addition to the game when they allowed you to start buying skill gems from the different vendors. And then at the end game, you would have access to every skill gem in the game. That was nice. It was nice. It actually avoided a lot of the hassle that we used to have in the early game when there was only like 3 acts. You really did need to plan your build out ahead of time because you needed to know where to get certain skill gems from certain quest givers and what class to pick in order to get those items. There is no way, as far as I remember, to buy skill gems in this game because they've gated it off level to level to level. If you were able to say buy any skill gem that you wanted, you could circumvent the whole tier list, which I hate this tier. I hate the tier list. It reminds me too much of Diablo and the shit that Diablo 4 did. It reminds me way too much of the skill tree from there. I hate it. I really wish they hadn't gone with a system like this. What does this mean for loot? It means that when loot drops, if it isn't the exact type of weapon you need, then you can't use it. And this was a problem in PoE 1 for different reasons. Gem slots in armor made finding new chest pieces difficult because the best body armor is the one that has the most connected slots, usually. But it sucked in PoE 1 as well, and I had hoped that they'd try to fix that problem, and they did try to fix it with having the gem slots just be in order and you can have as many as you want. But the problem is you have to upgrade and open these slots with a super, and I mean super, rare currency that I swear I had gone through the entire campaign dose twice. I had a bunch of level 3 drop, right? Which means you open up a 3rd slot. I had a bunch of those drop, but I had 0 drop for level 4 and level 5. 0. I couldn't get a single skill, aside from my auto attack, of course, to get them to have 5 gem slots. I couldn't get a single skill to that point. I couldn't even get a single skill to 4 because not one of them dropped. I feel like that's an even worse problem than PoE 1 had. At least in PoE 1, it was relatively easy to get a 5 link. I mean, it was. You can go through the entire game with a 5 link, and it was relatively easy to do. You just had to save up your currency and know what kind of item drops you needed to sell in order to get that currency. That's the only barrier for entry in PoE 1. But in PoE 2, you'll be lucky if you even get a 4 slot. This is further exasperated by a couple of different things. GGG thought it would be a great idea to limit you to 1 support skill gem of a single type in all of your skills. That means you can only have, let's say, 1 multiple projectile gem. That 1 multiple projectile gem can only support 1 skill and no other skills. Now, in PoE 1, you used to be able to, let's say, slot a multiple projectile into, let's say you have a 6 link. If you wanted to do this and you wanted to have 2 skills that all had greater multiple projectiles, well, you could put 2 skills in there and they would both get the benefit of that support gem. But in PoE 2, you can't do that. And not only can you not do that, but you can only have 1 skill gem that has that modifier on it, and the rest of them cannot. So you have even less options right now. I mean, if you're running like a cast on crit build in PoE 1, some of these kind of things are pretty necessary. PoE 2 just decided to cut all of that ingenuity of the player out of the equation. They say it's because it makes our lives easier, but it really just makes things a lot harder at the end of the day and makes it so that you have way less creativity on display in character builds. I don't like it. And this also has an effect on the loot, as you might imagine, because you already have very limited loot drops, right? And you have this gigantic, massive loot table of items that could possibly drop and all the percentages of those drop rates that are associated with them, right? But now you're also adding, on top of all the other stuff that can possibly drop, you're now adding skill gems, which may or may not be useful to people later on down the road when they really need to get an upgrade for their slots in their skill gems, but they just keep dropping support gem level 3s all the time. It doesn't sound like much, but it is. You know, every item that you put inside of a loot table means that everything else is less likely to drop. So it has an impact. I realize that it's weird to say that, especially when in PoE 1 all of the skill gems dropped, which is like 100 times more items in the loot table, right? But the difference between an uncut skill gem and an actual skill gem that has a skill on it is that when that skill gem drops, you might actually need that. That might actually have been the thing that you've been looking for. Whereas an uncut skill gem is just going to take up space in your stash because you don't need it right now. You've got all the skill gems you could possibly need. And it's even worse with support skill gems because you don't even have enough slots to put all the damn support gems in that you got. So they just sit in your stash doing nothing, taking up space in the loot table. Now we're going to talk about builds. Now, gems are limiting because of the lack of skills, right? But also because of the position of nodes on the passive tree. For the Huntress, you have in tier 1 an exploding javelin skill that does fire damage. But the nearest fire damage node is clear on the other side of the goddamn passive tree, rendering the skill useless in the late game unless you travel all the way over there to get it. But that takes a lot of travel nodes, as we like to call them. A travel node is an attribute node that connects other notable nodes. They made an improvement here by making the nodes upgrade an ability score the player chooses, and that's great, but they have the value of the attribute increase, and they nerfed attributes in general. You used to get 5 max HP and 2% increased physical damage for every 10 strength. That meant that you could stack attributes and get a lot of benefit out of it. In PoE 2, you get 10 life for the same amount of strength, and that's it. No extra damage, no armor, nothing, just life. You used to get accuracy and evasion for dex, and mana and energy shield for intelligence, and now you get accuracy for dex and mana for intelligence, and that's it. But that sounds like you'd be better off being able to get life through attributes and passives, but you can't get enough life from the passive tree anymore. You have to get it from the loot that doesn't drop as much anymore. That means longer and more intense grinding in a game that is already slow to play, and now you gotta compete with the fact that the progression is even slower now. So the further you have to travel on the passive tree, the more wasteful you're being in essence, which means a Fire Huntress build is a much tougher sell for your average player because it doesn't become even close to viable until way later in the game. And later on, the Huntress gets access to an ability like the Cleave from PoE 1, but it does bleed damage. But where are the nodes for bleed? Well, over here. And this node, I don't know how effective it is. Knockback seems nice, but when you actually use it, it's not that great. And it doesn't even knock the enemies back that much. And because the enemies run so goddamn fast, it doesn't help you mitigate anything. Now, this one over here seems like a really good cluster, but we have to travel 12 nodes, gaining 120 life, but nothing else, just so we can use a skill that we don't get to use until tier 2. And we don't receive another blood skill until tier 4. So we better like that skill because it's the only one we're gonna have for a while. The thing I really liked about PoE 1 is that I could have a barbarian that wears heavy armor, stat stack strength, and use wands in both hands, and that shit would be viable if I put enough work into it. Path of Exile 2 feels more like Diablo 3 than Diablo 3 does, and that's the beauty of PoE 1. I don't have to do the meta. I could do a crazy build, get through the campaign, and brag to my friends that my stupid idea worked out well. There was a big emphasis on fun, and the systems in PoE 2 for making builds is far too restrictive and has far too few choices. The linearity of progression hampers this even further, forcing players to play with skills they don't like for half of the game until they unlock the one they actually want is a really strange choice. I'm going to further solidify my my point with an example. I had a friend that made a build that he called Make Me Angry. He was so angry that he was on fire all the time, but he was also Wolverine, so he could tank the fire damage. But do you know who couldn't? The enemy. He'd walk right up to them, and before they could get a hit off, they dropped dead. He didn't need to hit a single button. The game played itself. Now, you might be saying, that doesn't sound like a whole lot of fun. Well, then you don't understand the fun at the heart of PoE 1. See, it's a playground to make your imagination a reality. Making something ridiculous work through hard work and preservation, that's the fun part. Like Factorio, right? Your character is the thing that you're building towards, and every step of the way you get closer to the goal of no longer having to hit buttons. Don't discount how important that aspect is to a game that is expecting people to go through the entire campaign whenever a new season releases and expects you to do the same content twice to get to the true end game. Then there's support gems that just don't work the way they're supposed to. Like, there's a support gem that is supposed to give you rage on each melee hit, right? And then for the Huntress, there is a skill allows you to hit the enemy multiple times with your spear, right? Each one of those hits is a melee hit, and there's 6 of them. But for whatever reason, you only get 2 stacks, as if you only hit the enemy twice. You're supposed to get 3 stacks of rage for every melee hit, and every time you use this skill, even though there's 6 attacks in it, you only get 6 rage. It's almost as if they're trying to stop players from being creative. It really is. Like, I thought I was genius for figuring this out, right? So you mean I can get 18 stacks of rage every time I hit somebody? That's 18% increase, man. That's awesome. No, you don't get that. Sorry. Try again. And there's no logical reason for it. Not that I can see. So if you're a player and you're playing this game and you're like, okay, it says that I should get X, but I'm not getting X, the player starts to ask themselves, what are they doing wrong? And what can they do better? But really, it's the game that's wrong. And now we come to my 4th and final reason. You gave an inch and they took a mile. GGG wanted PoE 2 to be harder and more engaging to play. I think we're all clear on that. And I'm not saying that doesn't work. It does, but the way you ramped up that challenge was at the sacrifice of fun progression. GGG thought it needed to streamline one of the more obtuse aspects of their progression system. It's a good idea, after all, to open up to a new audience, but unfortunately, games companies go about this in a way that alienates the old audience that made the first game so successful in the first place. They do this because for each aspect of a system they take away, they don't add anything in to replace it. So for instance, they took away the ability to really invest in health and energy shield and mana by taking away all of the increase nodes out of the passive tree. I think there's like 1 or 2, but I was having a really hard time finding any. In PoE 1, you could really focus on life and energy shield by just taking all of the increase nodes, and they were actual legitimately good increases. So you actually were okay spending your passive points, your precious and limited passive points, on things like life nodes or resistance nodes and things like that, right? There were a ton of resistant nodes on the PoE 1 passive tree. There's hardly any on PoE 2's. That means that you have to get, and hear me out here, this means that on all of your pieces of armor, you have to get one attribute that increases your life, meaning either life or energy shield. You also need to increase your armor or your evasion or your block, whatever main defense you're going for. And then you got to have your secondary defense. So let's say you have a barbarian character, right? And you want to focus on life, armor, and have like an energy shield backer because you're going to, let's say, go the route of increasing your strength based on how full your life is, right? Those were very viable builds in PoE 1. In PoE 2, that wouldn't be very viable. It would kind of hinder you quite a bit because armor even in PoE 1 is kind of fucked up and not very useful, because like you're building your character to survive boss fights. Those are the most difficult fights, right? That and some of the special encounters and dungeons. Those are the most difficult fights. The regular mobs, the yellows, the blues, all that stuff, those aren't as difficult. It's the bosses that are the real problems, right? Because some of these fights can end up turning into a fucking bullet hell. So you've got this situation now where you can't get life from the passive tree anymore, and it's really difficult to get the amount of resistances you need. So now those are 3 things that you are going to need to have on your armor to make that armor good, right? Every piece of armor that you get, if it doesn't have health on it, if it doesn't have mana on it, if it doesn't have energy shield or armor or evasion or whatever it is that you need, you now can no longer use that item. It's junk. Even if it has a really good base. Let's say it drops an item and it has everything you need, right? It's got extra evasion, extra energy shield, and it's a max roll, right? And it's a max roll for percentage increases too, but there's not a single resistance on the entire armor, no health increase, no mana increase. You can't use that armor. You can't. And the only way that you could fix that armor is to hit it with a chaos, right? Slam a chaos at it. But by doing that, you take the risk of losing the attribute you actually want. Now you can recombinate the thing, but the percentage chance of the recombinator is so low that it's not even worth it, right? I think it was like 0.9%. It was less than a percentage point chance. So it's worthless. And getting actual loot ends up coming down to having to go to a vendor and buying a bunch of random shit from a vendor and hoping that you get lucky and you gamble and you actually get the item you need, right? It's all a gamble. It's all luck. There's no skill involved here. There's no targeted grinding, nothing. It's totally random, and that kind of sucks. And then when you try to mitigate these limitations, you find out that everything has been stripped down. The skill gems. We've already talked about how the skill gems got nerfed down really bad. Well, we haven't really talked about the support gems yet. The support gems probably got it even worse. Support gems in PoE 1, they would have a really good benefit and a pretty bad downside, but the benefit usually outweighed the downside, especially if you build around that downside, right? My favorite support gem, mainly because it's useful and also not that useful at the same time, would have to be greater multiple projectiles. I used to think that it was the best support gem in the game because I was thinking like, oh yeah, I could shotgun people. No, they've mitigated that. So you can't actually shotgun people by getting really close to them and hitting them with multiple projectiles. Unfortunately, that just doesn't work. But in PoE 1, greater multiple projectiles will give you like up to 5 arrows that you can shoot every time you shoot one. And for big groups, that could be really good. But it also has a downside. It has a massive cut to your overall damage, 35%. But when you're hitting for 65% of your base damage, 5 different enemies, and if you have Pierce, even more than that, the damage ends up working out in your favor. But in PoE 2, not only do you get that damage debuff, it also gives you a second debuff in the form of a 20% decrease to your attack speed. That's really bad. I don't know how the math works out there, but that feels like a gigantic cut to my damage and my damage potential. And that happens with just about every single support gem. Like it used to be in PoE 1 that I could say, I'm going to add extra frost damage to my weapon, and I would get extra frost damage. No downsides, extra frost damage, right? Great. You can't do that in PoE 2. You can't do that without losing 50% of your other damage types. I trade 35% cold damage for a 50% reduction in all other damage types? What? And you know what? I actually think I'm probably wrong. Let me look this up actually. PoE2 support. Added fire damage. Oh yeah, it's so much worse than I thought. You only gain 25% fire damage, but you deal 50% less cold and lightning damage. Now, I want to point out to you that if you get an item that has lightning damage on it or cold damage on it, those things can be quite significant, especially in the late game. So you're not just losing 50%, you're actually losing 50% of cold and 50% of lightning to combine to make a much larger percentage of your overall damage. So that's just dog shit, right? They took away a bunch of the really cool stuff in Path of Exile 1 and then didn't replace it with anything cool. You took away my ability to just flatly increase my damage, but you didn't give me anything in return. You took away my ability to buy life nodes on the skill tree, but you didn't replace it with anything else. You took away masteries on the passive tree as well and didn't give us anything else in return. Masteries were great in PoE 1. It was able to really change your build in a drastic way. A mastery could make you think, well, I'm gonna go this way with my character, and then you see that mastery and you go, maybe I should go this way instead. So they took away depth and didn't replace it with anything. And this is the main takeaway that you should get from this. They took away the depth in their game so that you had to play it the way they designed it. You understand? No creativity for you, no deviation from the way we want you to play this game. I hope you like Dark Souls because that's what you're in for, but you're in for a more tedious experience because you have to do the same thing you would do in Dark Souls maybe 150 times. You got to do it thousands of times. You know, I wanted to get to this point. All right, so I know that it sounds like I'm being really, really negative, and it probably sounds like I don't like PoE 2. I'm actually just expressing some of the frustrations of other people and sort of explaining why it feels that way to them. I just recently started playing the Huntress, and I gotta say, I really like it. I actually like the combo system in this game. It doesn't feel terribly tedious to do a lot of the stuff, but there is a main problem that I have, and that's that sometimes it takes far too long to kill anything in this game. Sometimes yellows will take me upwards of 5 minutes of dodging around, doing combos, waiting for an opportunity to get a combo off and all that kind of shit. Sometimes it takes me like 5 minutes just to kill one of those guys, and that's super tedious. It does not get any more fun the longer you play. And then we got to talk about one of my own personal gripes, and that is boss fights. I cannot tell you how many times I have spent 10 minutes fighting a boss, slowly whittling them down to no health, just to have the game up somehow, flub my dodge roll, rubber band me back in front of the enemy, and get me one shot right at the end, right as they got like 2 hit points left, and now I gotta do the whole goddamn tedious thing again. Listen to me. If there is one thing that you need to do in this game, it's reduce some of these monsters' health, man. Okay? It is not challenging to have to do the same thing 300 times to kill one enemy. That is not challenging. That is tedium. I really hope that you guys listen to us when it comes to this because it's super important, okay? It is a tedious experience. Every time I come to a boss, I do this. All right, let's get this over with. That is not the reaction that I should be having towards a boss fight. So I think that the problem really is with all of this is that GGG had this idea of blending PoE's gameplay with Elden Ring, Dark Souls type combat. And yeah, that's a cool idea on paper, but really tedious in execution. These two game types just don't go together. Slow, methodical gameplay is good when there is a fraction of the enemies to have to fight, and when each enemy is able to kill you, it is not okay to have 100 of them on the screen at one time, all of which have 3 times the amount of HP they should have and take forever to kill. It's not frantic. It doesn't panic me. I'm not excited. I don't get the dopamine that I would get from a Dark Souls game when I defeat a hard enemy. I don't get any of that. I just feel the tedium. So I really hope you guys take example from this. You really rethink your strategy with white enemies and blue enemies, at least. Yellow enemies, yeah, whatever, they stay the same. You know, boss enemies, fine, but please reduce the amount of health on them, or at least negate the one shots. Like, the thing that really pisses me off in this game is the fact that I can stack armor to its max, right? And I will still get one shot by a boss, because the way that damage reduction in armor works is that it gets less effective the more damage the enemy does. So that means that you might have 90% resistance when you're fighting a regular enemy, but when you're fighting a boss and they do one of their one-shot moves, your armor's only like 50% or 30% effective, right? So you only negate 30% of that damage, which means they one-shot you every time. That's not fun. I don't like that, especially when the fight takes 10 to 15 minutes in order to actually beat it, and the guy can one-shot you with a lucky hit. And a lucky hit is a real problem when your dodge roll works so shitty that it gets hung up on every little object in the scene, gets hung up on enemies. I swear to God, I've been killed more times when I dodge around an enemy, and instead of dodging around the enemy, I rubber band back to in front of the enemy and get hit and killed. What the fuck, man? Seriously, you've got a game where you have hordes of enemies, an insane amount of enemies at times, and you're saying that you can't dodge roll through an enemy, you have to dodge roll around them? How many times has a player here been pinned against the corner and ganged by a group of enemies? Because I have plenty of times, and there is nothing I can do about it, because when they get you in a corner and they surround you like that and you can't get out, you get stun locked to death. That is not fun. So I really think a lot of the problem with this game is just centered around how long it takes to kill enemies and how many different things you have to do in order to kill enemies. I like the combo system. I like the way combat feels. It's way more active, and stringing together combos feels really good. The problem is you make me do it thousands of times in a single playthrough. That's not fun. And there was one more thing that I wanted to touch on that I didn't touch on initially, but I've come to realize is a real problem the longer I actually play the Huntress. Her parry mechanic is actually a lot of fun. I hear a lot of people complaining about it and saying that it's not fun, they don't like it, they don't like having to do it, and okay, you're entitled to your opinion. I actually really like it, because in a lot of boss fights, it just trivializes them, right? If you know what to parry and what not to parry. Here's the thing. It's very hard to tell what you're supposed to parry and what you're not supposed to parry. So anything that's a melee swing, I'm thinking naturally that I should be able to parry that attack, right? Like, so for instance, when you're playing against Geonor, when he shifts into the wolf form, he doesn't leave you even a single opening for getting a parry. It's very difficult to get a parry on him, and therefore very difficult to get a frenzy charge, and therefore impossible to get a combo off, right? But the biggest issue for me is that some of his attacks are parryable, some of his attacks are not. Now, it becomes obvious to you early on in the game that you can only block melee attacks, right? But then later on, you figure out that, oh wait, if I'm close enough to the enemy, I can actually parry their ranged attacks, right? Okay, cool. You get used to doing that kind of stuff, and then you fight a boss, and then you realize that there are certain things you can parry, certain things you can't. So for instance, if he does one of those perilous attacks, I'm just going to call them perilous attacks, it's when they bring their weapon up, a sound plays and a red flash happens, right? That's your signal to dodge, because you're not supposed to be able to block them. But the thing is, you can block them. You can block some of those attacks and not block other attacks like that. It's very strange. And then there's stuff like an enemy will punch you, right? And you can parry that, but for some reason you can't parry the kick. So you have to remember that if he's doing a kick, I can't block that, but I can block the punch. So what ends up happening is for every enemy in the game, you have to memorize up here, memorize which attacks can be parried and which attacks can't be parried. And when you have a game that has over 50 different enemy types, you're asking too much of the player. So what I would suggest the GGG, German Goo Girls, is that they take this system, right, and they add some sort of signifier to the player when you can parry something and when you can't, akin to the Sekiro Perilous attack system, right? If I see that icon over their head, I know I can't parry it. It's time to get the hell out of there. So that's something to think about. And then the other thing too is that the parry sometimes works and sometimes doesn't, and I can't quite figure out a reason for that. Attacks that I will parry previously will not parry if I'm a certain distance away from the enemy, and by certain distance I mean right up on top of them. I don't know why. It's like sometimes it'll swing over your head and not hit you, and that's fine, right? But like sometimes you'll be so close to the enemy that you can't parry them, but you also get hit by their attack. Why? You know? So they really need to clean up this parry in order to make it super useful. I'm loving it so far. I think it's a great start. I just think they need to clean it up. And there was something else I wanted to add here too about the dodge roll. One of the things I hate the most about the dodge roll is the fact that when an enemy does like a leaping attack, like they go up into the air and over the player, it doesn't go over the player. It takes the player with them. You travel with them, regardless of whether or not you dodged or not. If you are caught within their collision mesh, you are pushed with them. So you end up dodging the attack correctly and in time, but because your mesh got hung up or because you rubber band back in front of him while he was doing his leap, you get pushed with his leap and then hit and perhaps one shot. Really great. As you can imagine, not the desired outcome. So they got some work to do, and I hope they do it because I actually really like the base game. So I really hope they take a step back from this and they have a real long think on it and maybe come to some different conclusions, and we'll see how it goes. Anyway, this has been fun, guys. I hope the new style of video hasn't turned you off too much. I know seeing real people on camera frightens some of you people, but you'll get over it. You could hear that I have a really bad cold and that the cough has really taken a lot out of me. But I hope it wasn't too annoying hearing me all congested and everything. But I really wanted to get this video out. I wanted to be the first to say all of the things that I said. I'm probably not the first. Somebody's probably already mentioned all this shit. I'll have another video coming out pretty soon. It's kind of a shit post. I hope you're ready for that. And I'm going to be working on the Kenshi video, the sequel video for Kenshi here pretty soon. I've already got it all planned out and written. I just have to actually get some time to get into the game. This has been a month of news. Lots of things happen. I put a Patreon exclusive video out talking about the Nintendo deal and all the stuff happening with them. And then a few weeks ago, I put out another Patreon exclusive about Disco Elysium because of some news that I heard. It just seems like every week I'm hearing news that enrages me to the point where I jump into my sound booth and I just have to record and scream at the screen. So yeah, anyway, it's been a fun month. I hope you guys like the new content because I really don't have a choice. This is how things are gonna have to be for a while. But I will be trying to get some more game videos out here soon. Anyway, it's been fun, y'all. Love you. Stay safe out there. Get some survival supplies. This is actually not a joke. I'm not shit posting. Get survival supplies. Get canned food. Okay? Get flashlights. Get batteries. Fuck my phone. Get batteries. Hell, maybe even get a generator. Do your part, because I'm telling you right now, shit ain't looking good. For people who stuck around this long, I'm going to tell you, Michael Burry, you know, the guy from the Big Short, he recently just shorted, or not recently, I guess it was like last year he did this, and I've been following it ever since. He shorted the U.S. Treasury bond. I don't know if you know what that means, but he's speculating by shorting that it's going to lose value. If the bond loses value, so does our currency. Okay? Just saying. Guy's been right before, probably right again. I'm telling you. Get supplies. Anyway, love you. Peace out.